My name is Miss Helena, and I'm a services librarian with the Hawaii State Public Library System. So today I'm pleased to introduce our guest author, Miss Lehua Parker. She's originally from Hawaii and a graduate of Kamehameha Schools. She writes speculative fiction for kids and adults that often explores the intersections of Hawaii's past, present, and future. And today she'll be reading a short excerpt from the first book in the Niuhi Shark Saga series, One Boy No Water. All right, so let's turn it over to Miss Parker.
Aloha kako, everybody. I am so excited to be here. I'm Lehua Parker. I'm the author of the Niuhi Shark Saga trilogy, and this is the first book, One Boy No Water. The second one is One Shark No Swim, and the third is One Truth No Lie. And today, I'm going to be reading from One Boy No Water. But I'm not going to read from the beginning. So I need to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the story. So in the series is mostly about a boy named Zader. And Zader is, when the series starts, is 13 years old. And when he was a newborn baby, he was abandoned by his mother. And he was found lying on some rocks out on a lava outcrop near a big tide pool at a place called Pico Point. And he was found by Uncle Kahana and his dog Ilima. And they took this little baby to the Weston family, who adopted him. And then they named him Alexander Kaunakai Weston, Zader for short. Now, Zader has a brother, Jay Weston, who is the same age as he is, and an older sister named Lilinoy. Now, everybody likes Jay. He's a good student. He's a lot of fun to be around, and he's a great athlete. He loves to surf. And Zader, well, Zader's allergic to water. I mean, really, if he gets a drop of water on his skin, it bubbles and blisters and turns gray, and it's just weird. And sometimes kids are mean to Zader because he's different, but Jay sticks up for him, and that's another reason why Jay is such an awesome brother. So while Jay surfs, Zader sits at a beach pavilion, up above, and he draws, and he's really talented. And for Christmas, he's carving a shark out of a piece of driftwood to give to his sister Lily. But Zader and the rest of the family are really worried about Jay because Jay won't go in the water anymore. He's not surfing. All he's doing is laying on the couch and he's watching Shark Week shows. Now Zader thinks it's because Jay saw something out in the ocean, but Jay's not talking about it. The part that I'm going to read happens on Christmas Eve, just as the sun sets. Zader, Uncle Kahana, and Ilima are sitting on the front lanai of the Weston house and talking story. And Zader is finishing up his carving for Lily. And each chapter of the Niuhi Shark Saga trilogy starts with a Hawaiian or pidgin word or phrase and its definition. So here we go. This is from One Boy No Water, chapter 31, Red Flags. Ku'e akena, to taunt or defy. On the steps below, Ilima licked my toes and I shivered. Uncle Kahana gestured to the carving in my hand. Let me see, he said. I handed the shark to him and he held it up in the red and green glow of the Christmas tree coming through the front window. The sun finally dipped below the horizon and twilight ended, calling in the night. Shark, he said. I nodded. The yard lights flicked on, harsh, but not as harsh as the big overhead lanai lights would be. The yard lights were good, enough light to see, but not enough to attract bugs. What shark? Jay asked, stepping through the doorway. This one, Uncle Kahana said. Zader's for Lily, Jay asked. I nodded. Jay stood there awkwardly, ukulele hanging by his side. Come, sit, said Uncle Kahana. He flicked his eyebrows at Jay. You gonna sing for us? No, I was just fooling around. Jay reached beside one of the rockers and grabbed a sports chair leaning against the house. With a snap of his wrist and a kick of his foot, he opened it and sat. Keep fooling around, said Uncle Kahana. You sound pretty good. Bombay, if you work hard, you'll be really good, like Z-Boy's carving. He has real talent. Jay looked down at his feet and shrugged. Uncle Kahana handed my shark to Jay and watched as Jay trailed a finger along the shark's spine. Both of you have lots of talent. Shame if you waste them, yeah? Jay's finger paused at the shark's closed mouth. Now, Z-Boy, what kind of shark is that? Uncle Kahana asked. I don't know, I said. Uncle Kahana tilted his head, considering. It's a blend, yeah. One line from a tiger shark, another from a great white, and one from a mako, I think. He squinted, then pointed. One thing's certain, it's a shark. Yeah, Jay agreed. Niuhi shark? Asked Uncle Kahana, shooting a bolt of lightning down my spine. No, I blurted. No, it's for Lily. I paused, confused. What? Jay asked. What's a Niuhi shark? Uncle Kahana smiled and reached for the carving. No, Z boy, you're right. Whatever kind of shark this is, it's not Niuhi. He took the tail gently between his thumb and fingers and stroked along the grain. Doesn't feel Niuhi. Jay looked from me to Uncle Kahana and back again. What's Niuhi? Uncle Kahana stopped petting the shark and handed it back to me. He turned to look at Jay directly. Niuhi sharks, Jay boy, are man-eaters. No matter what you heard, only one kind of shark hunts and eats men, and that's Niuhi. Jay sat back in his chair and scoffed. You're behind the times, Uncle Kahana. Plenty of sharks eat people. Bull sharks, great white, hammer, tiger head, tiger, hammerhead. No, only one kind, Niuhi. No, I saw it in Shark Week in Australia. You stay Australia? Jay blinked. No, he said. Then why are you worried about Australian sharks? I'm not. Good. Then listen to your uncle. In Hawaii, there's only one kind of shark to worry about, Niuhi. Niuhi? Jay looked around the lanai. What kind is that? Told you, said Uncle Kahana. Man-eater. He smiled. Or man-biter. Depends on the mood. What? Jay gulped. Elima raised her head off my foot and barked. Kuli kuli, Elima, chastened Uncle Kahana. I'm getting to it. He motioned her to lay back down. Everything okay out there? Mom called from the kitchen. Yeah, I hollered. Uncle Kahana's just telling us about sharks. Lily bumped open the screen door with her hip, her hands busy with a tray loaded with a pitcher and tall ice glasses and a bowl. I slipped my shark behind my back and covered it with an orange oil rag. Sharks? She said. Get chokula about sharks. She set the tray down on the table and picked up the bowl. Here, Elima, for you, she called as she set it on the lanai. Elima patted over, sniffed her feet, then lapped a drink. Lily lifted a glass from the tray. She pivoted gracefully, holding it out. For you, Uncle. Lemonade. Shoots, he said, taking the glass. He tipped it towards her. Mahalo, Lily. Lily said, the boys of my halau are learning a new shark hula. It's about these guys in a canoe who are lost in the ocean. A shark comes and leads them back to land. She sidestepped and away, arms out. Real powerful. Uncle Kahana sipped the lemonade. Oh no, Lily. Cold and a little bit sour, a little bit sweet. Perfect. He smacked his lips. Plenty hula and ole honor sharks. Sharks have helped our people for a long, long time. Guided us, protected us. Protected us, Jay squeaked. You just said sharks eat humans. Lily flopped down on the porch swing. Elima jumped up and laid her head in Lily's lap, abandoning me. Lily glanced at Jay, the glass halfway to her mouth. And what do you know? You ever listen to my kumuhula talk about sharks? She sniffed and took a drink. You watch too many Shark Week shows, Jay. I looked at Jay with his knees bent and feet tucked up on the seat of the chair, arms wrapping his body into a neat bundle. Nothing dangling. I cleared my throat. Uncle, you were telling us about Niuhi sharks. Ah, Niuhi sharks. He settled a little more deeply on the stairs, resting his glass on his knee. What do they look like? Jay asked. Good question, Jay boy, but hard to answer. They can look any kind. He motioned with his hands. Big, medium, super ginormous, even small. The older the shark, the bigger. He shrugged, jiggling the ice in his glass. But it's not the size that's important. It's the intent. It's what's in the heart of a shark that makes it Niuhi or not. Bubbles, Jay said. All your talk is bubbles. Heart? Jay blew a puff of air. Sharks don't have heart. Instinct, Uncle. Only instincts. Everyone knows sharks hunt humans because they're easy pickings. Kahana shook his head. Bulai, he said. Sharks hunt people. Bulai. If that were true, Jay, the water would be red from here to Pu'uvai to Kailuakona. Truth, I thought. If we tasted good, like coconut ice cream, nobody could surf. Uncle Kahana pressed his lips and wrinkled his nose. Most sharks, they're just like a bull in his pasture, minding his own beeswax, thinking his bully thoughts, wondering what the Wahine cows are up to. If you enter the pasture quietly, with respect, he's going to ignore you. You can pick mangoes, whatever, no biggie. But if he doesn't want you there, he'll snort a little, maybe paw the ground. That's when you know to leave. Uncle Kahana waved away a moth. But take that same bull and jump in the pasture, yelling and waving a red cape, and guarants that bugger going to stop you into guava jelly. He took a sip. Same with sharks. Shark Week shows are all about waving red flags at bulls. Those programs tell the truth of what a shark can do, Jay said. It's science. Uncle Kahana snorted. If you chum the water, keep bloody fish near your body, swim in murky water, or at night, or where the river meets the ocean. In other words, if you act like prey, then don't be surprised if you end up missing a limb. That's science. Jay flinched and hugged his knees tightly. Uncle Kahana took another sip. Respect, yeah? Just like you respect the bull's pasture, his home, you don't go into the ocean acting like prey. You ever notice almost every time someone gets bit by a shark, it's a tourist? They don't know our ocean, and our ocean doesn't know them. Respect, both sides. Respect, scoffed Jay. For what? You're still talking bubbles, Uncle Kahana. Uncle Kahana weighed his words carefully. Jay, he said, you're in a really hard place right now. You've been filling your head with shark facts and stories that don't matter. Listen to your uncle. Sharks are not your enemy. They're not out to get you. Niuhi are the only sharks you need to worry about in these waters, and there are ways to keep yourself safe. How do you know? How do I know? Yeah, how do you know? Demanded Jay, his chin resting on his knees. How do I know what? Uncle Kahana snagged a piece of ice with his teeth. How to be safe or about Niuhi? Niuhi. Uncle Kahana crunched the ice, thinking. Niuhi shark. Once you've seen a Niuhi shark, you know the difference, and you never forget. Other sharks are just Ferdinands in the pasture. Chapter 32, Lehua in the Sea. Kauna, a hidden or concealed meaning or reference to a person, place, or thing. You've seen one, Jay asked. For real, you've seen a man-eater. You've seen Niuhi. Here it comes, I thought. Uncle Kahana leaned against the rail. I was just a kid the first time I saw a Niuhi shark. These guys came to Laole Harbor from Kailua, I think. They wanted to go fishing at Kekikai with a big hukilau net. You kids know what I'm talking about, hukilau, where they pull a huge net into the ocean. The whole community stands on the beach pulling it in. We nodded. Lily started humming the song and making the hand motions. Yeah, Lily, like that. My father, Bobby Nichols, they used to call him. Why? I asked. Later, Uncle Kahana said, that's another story. My father was a fisherman on the weekdays and worked as a hapahauli musician on the weekends. CJ, he said, shaking a finger, that's why I know you have musical talent. It runs in your veins. He swirled his ice, then drained his glass. Bobby Nichols found out about these guys and their plans. He went down to the docks to talk with them. You can't use hukilau nets here, he said. Why? They asked. Kapu, he told them. It's forbidden to use big nets. You can only fish using small throwing nets or fishing line. Uncle Kahana paused, holding out his glass. A little more, Jay. Jay stood up and refilled his glass, lemonade melting the ice as it ran down the side. Mahalo, Jay boy, he said, and took another sip. He looked off into the distance. Obeying Kapu is important, he continued. But back then, people already didn't understand, didn't believe. You're crazy to believe that kind, they said. Get plenty fish at Kekikai. We're pulling hukilau tomorrow. Come, bring your family. Plenty cacao for everyone. The next morning, my father woke me up. He made 2 tea leaf leis and tied one around my ankle and the other around his own. We went to the docks and took out the Toro, riding the sail past the lava flow and around Pico Point. When we got to Kekikai, they were already dropping the net. Don't do this, Daddy begged. This is a kid's beach. Think about our keiki in the water. Niuhi sharks live here. You're going to make them angry by breaking kapu. Hukilau nets take everything, good fish, trash fish, any kind. But they never listened. Uncle Kahana closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. I remember there were a few guys working the net in the water. The day was calm, typical Kekikai, clear. The sand bottom was only 20 feet deep. Suddenly, the hair raised on my arms. In the boat, I could feel chicken skin pop out all over my body. It crawled up my spine and stuck in my throat. Daddy, I asked, what's that? Kuli kuli, he told me. Too late, he stayed calm. The first guy never made a sound, just gone. Not even a manini ghost of red in the ocean, nothing. Hey, where's Moki? Somebody asked. They could feel it too, but no one said what they already knew. Then one guy, just treading water and holding on to the tops of the net, jerked once, like someone was pulling his leg, but then no more leg. Then no more 2 legs. Snip, 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 like scissors, so fast. The blood blossomed in the water like red lehua in the mountains. That's when the screaming started. Elima whined and tucked a paw over her nose. Uncle Kahana smiled faintly at her, then looked at us one by one. A Niuhi shark was in the water, and he was more than hoo-hoo over the net. He was rabid with anger. After the second bite, my father pulled me away from the side of the toro and took down the sail. Don't look, Daddy said. I covered my ears and closed my eyes, but I remembered lots of shrieking and splashing, and then, well, worse, silence. 5 guys got bit that day, and 3 died. 2 bled out before they could get back to the beach, and the first guy, well, they never found anything. Our friends and neighbors on shore yelled, "Shark!" and "Get out of the water!" But I stayed in the middle of the toro, holding my ears and squeezing my eyes until the boat shifted hard to the right and water splashed on my skin. I opened my eyes, scared the shark had bumped the boat, but it was my father. He jumped over the side and into the water. Jay gasped. Tutu Kane Kalupali jumped in. Aye, Jay, Bobby Nichols jumped in. To save the guys, right? Lily asked. No, I said slowly, not to save them. They never listened. They deserved it. He jumped in the water for something else. Uncle Kahana met my eyes, telling me something I didn't understand. It wasn't the shark's fault. Why? Lily asked. Why did he jump? The shark, said Uncle Kahana, finally blinking. It was tangled in the net. He stared into the bottom of his glass, seeing what we couldn't imagine. Daddy knew the shark would drown and die if it wasn't cut free. He jumped into the Lehua water with his long boning knife, grabbed the net through the bloody blossoms, and sawed away. I leaned over the side and looked down into the water. Daddy was so small and the shark was so big. But he kept working, sliding his knife, slicing through the net. When Daddy got to the last loop trapping its tail, the shark turned and Daddy's knife slipped, nicking the tip off the shark's tail clean off. I thought, this is it. Daddy'd freed the shark so it could feed on him. In the darkness, from the safety of time and the lanai, we trembled. Uncle Kahana swallowed. But the shark turned and paused. It looked Daddy in the eye with that cold, fierce, jet-back Niuhi Manu eye. Bits of flesh and blood in the water between them, they stared at each other. But then Daddy had to take a breath. I watched as he slowly rose to the surface, no faster than his bubbles, barely kicking. Uncle Kahana rubbed the chicken skin on his arms. I saw that Niuhi eye just once more, he whispered. It looked into my young eyes peering over the edge of the boat, and I saw its black Niuhi heart. I don't know what it saw in mine. Uncle Kahana rolled his neck and shoulders, trying to ease the tension. He sighed. Daddy broke the surface, took a breath, then looked back down. The Niuhi shark was circling under the turo, moving in and out of the blood-red clouds like a car is coming in and out of the fog. The other guys were already in their boat, motors roaring for the docks. Before it disappeared, I saw the Niuhi shark nudge what was left of the net on the sandy bottom. The next thing I remember is standing on Keikikai's shore, watching the pink foam roll in, waiting for Daddy to come back. He'd stayed out in the water to pick up all of the bits of netting from the ocean floor he could find. After the shark attacks? Jay breathed. Uncle Kahana nodded. Why? Uncle Kahana looked up from his memory, surprised. Well, to keep the kids safe, of course. Anyway, so those are just 2 chapters from One Boy, No Water. And I hope you enjoyed it.
Hey, thank you very much, Lehua. So that was really vivid and relatable, especially hearing all the local place names and the pigeon. Um, so as you were reading the part about the shark carving, I got this really vivid and terrible image of a combination shark. Because like Zader, the initial reaction to sharks is terror.
Yeah.
But Uncle's got a point. The ocean is the shark's home. It's just minding its own business in there, and then we're sort of like the intruders or visitors. So thank you again. All right, so now it's time for audience questions. So let me see. Okay, so if anyone in the audience has a question for like Miss Parker, can go ahead and ask it. Okay. And yeah, so you
So,
can. Oh,
Helena, I was just going to say I was moderating the chat. So if you are putting your questions in chat, can you please put them in Q&A? Otherwise, they're going to get lost. But we did have one comment from Richard, and he said he doesn't have a question, but he's an English teacher and also facilitates a book club at his school. I've read the Shark trilogy, enjoyed it very much. I've also loaned the trilogy to one of the book club members, an eighth grader student who enjoyed the books very much. So that's just a little bit of praise, not a question. But yes, please put your questions in the Q&A box. And if, Helena, I know you had a few questions too, so maybe you can ask those right now and give people some time to start thinking of their questions.
all right. So let's see. My first question. So what inspired you to write this series?
That's a good question. When I was in second grade, I was going to Kahalui Elementary on Maui, and it was the second to the last day of the school year, and it was movie day. So we all got to go into the cafeteria where they'd taken the benches and put them aside, and all of the jealousies were closed, and so it was hot and stuffy, but it was okay because we were laying on the cold cement, and we started watching a film, and the film was The Legends of Old Hawaii, and it was a legend of Nanaue, and it was about this kid and his friends, and it was set in ancient Hawaii, and so it was the first time that we had seen kids in malos and those kinds of things, and then to see it in school and being second grade, everybody was kind of teeheeing and laughing about that. But I got sucked into the story very quickly, and basically people in this village are disappearing, and they're mostly young people. They're disappearing, and so of course everybody is very concerned, and they're trying to figure out what's happening to all of these people. And there's a moment in the film where somebody rips the cape off this one kid, because he's always running around wearing like a little cape, and they rip the cape off, and on his back is a shark's mouth. And it you got to go way back to old special effects, but it looks like it's kind of gaping, and then everybody's like, oh, horrors. And this was before Jaws, so that was a shock to all of us kids, because we knew you needed to watch out for like Portuguese man o' war and fauna. Nobody told us to watch out for sharks when we were swimming in the ocean all the time. And so it comes out that this kid has the ability to change form into a shark, and he's hungry. So he's been luring his friends to go fishing out in the ocean, and when they're out in the ocean, he eats them. And that kind of stuck with me. I mean, big time that stuck with me. And one day, decades later, I was, grown and living in my own house in the mountains of Utah, and it was snowing outside. And I kept thinking about this story, and I kept thinking about how it was a surprise to most of the villagers that this kid could turn into a shark, but it should not have been a surprise to his family. His family should have known. I mean, they knew that he had the ability to change into a shark, because they kept it covered and they kept it secret. So when these kids were disappearing, they pretty much knew what was happening, but they didn't tell anybody. They didn't try to protect the rest of the village. And so a lot of those ideas were going through my head, and that was kind of the genesis for the Niuhi Shark Saga. What would it be to be something, to be a shark in human form and not know it, and to have all of these rules wrapped around you about how you have to live, because people who love you are trying to protect you and everybody else. And if you're a shark, does that mean you're immediately going to eat people? Are you going to just be that sociopath predator? And so those questions and other kinds of things kind of bubbled in my mind, and they eventually became the answers to those questions eventually became the Niuhi Shark Saga.
Okay, wow, that's really fascinating, and also I like how you were inspired by a story from your childhood. So let's see. Okay, so we have our first question from the audience. This is from Jennifer, and she says, or she asks, what advice do you have to aspiring authors, both young and also those who are currently looking to publish? And how did you make the decision between traditional versus independent publishing?
Okay, so number one advice, love stories. So read. If you're going to be a writer and you're going to write novels or short stories or poems, read. Read everything. Read good stories, read classics, read modern stuff, read terrible books. So you know what a terrible book looks like versus a good book. Find the things that speak to you and study. Figure out how the story is told, why the authors made those kinds of decisions, and then in addition to reading, write. So just write. And if you write just for yourself or just for a small group of people, that's perfectly fine. You're as valid as a writer as somebody who sells billions of copies of books. Um, we tend to sometimes put a lot of pressure on people when they say they're writing a book or a story. Well, when is it going to be published? And published can be whatever it looks like to you. Publishing is not necessarily a validation as a writer. So don't be afraid. You can write just for yourself or for other people. But it's a shame if you only write for yourself that you don't share it. So I also encourage people to share it. So there's traditional publishing and there's indie publishing. I do both. And most of my works are traditionally published. And over time, I've had the rights returned to me because books go out of print, things go out of print. They're no longer on the publisher's front list, so they don't get the marketing, they don't get the advertising. And at that point, most of my contracts now, I get those rights back. And so to keep those books out there, I started my own publishing company, and so then I re-released these titles. There are advantages to both. At a certain point, the difference between a bestseller on the New York Times list versus an indie published book is not quality. It's the marketing dollars that get behind it. So what makes a book big really is the marketing dollars that get behind it and the publicity that a big press can give you. That's kind of the biggest bump. But if you want to have control over like your book prices and where your books are offered and that they stay in print, kind of go indie. Some markets are easier to do indie than others. Books for adults, not surprising, do better generally indie. Middle grade and young adult and children's books tend to do better if they are traditionally published because of the gatekeepers and the way books get into kids' hands. And so kind of depends on what you're writing. I hope I answered your question. I was kind of talking in a circle there. If you want something more specific, please ask again.
Okay, thank you. So let's see. Okay, we have our second question from Richard. He asks, so you have written a tale of a shapeshifter and specifically of an adolescent protagonist. Prior to or during the writing process, have you done research about shapeshifter narratives from different cultures around the world and the metaphor of teenage shape-shifting being symbolic for the changes the body goes through during puberty?
I did not do research, not specifically into that. But when I talk about loving stories, at the time I started writing this series, I had published other books and novels and plays and other things. So I had quite a resume as a writer. But more importantly, a resume as a reader. It was not uncommon for me to read 300 or more books a year. So I have a lot of stories in my head, and we can do literary analysis and we can break all of those kinds of things down. But I didn't actually do a lot of research for that because I felt like I knew these kinds of stories already. And my goal in telling the Niuhi Shark Saga was to write a story where local kids in Hawaii would see themselves at the center of the story. And I was writing particularly for I had a picture in my head of who I was writing for, and it was, you know, a young boy in Kaneohe, Kailua, you know, Waimanalo, Kailua Kona, someplace where maybe he didn't read a lot. There wasn't a lot of books because they weren't interesting to him. They didn't reflect his life or the people around him. They weren't about things like lua and surfing and sharks and shave ice and kites, you know, and all that kind of stuff. Um, so for that reason, I tried to embed the story as closely as I could in Hawaii, with not a lot of explanation about Pidgin or Hawaiian or that local point of view, because rather than it being the other, it was the main focus. And so more than that, I did more research around things like how to paint a surfboard. I had no idea how to do that. Lua, you know, those kinds of things. That was more what I researched, other than the transformation and the allegory. I think for me, a closer allegory is Xader's allergy for water. You know, his being allergic to water is really more of something about anything that can set a kid off from his peers, make them separate. And it could be skin tone, it could be religious background, it could be gender, it could be orientation, you know, any of those kinds of things. That to me was what the water allergy was about. And then how you turn what's perceived as a weakness into strength. And then again, is your, what people assume about you, is that therefore your destiny, or can you choose differently? So those were more of the kinds of questions that I was thinking about when I was writing the series.
Okay, thank you. I think that's really interesting how both writers and readers have different takeaways. So, all right. So the next question is, what made you want to be an author? Was it hard to publish your book?
I always liked stories. I was the kid that, you know, would run from recess and go slip into the library and find books and read books. And I always had 2 or 3 books squirreled away that I was carrying around that I was reading. And so I was probably about 7 years old, and there were no more books to read. I had read everything in the house. I had read all of the cereal boxes a million times. And my mom didn't have time to take me to the library, and I was very, very sad. And she said, "Go write your own stories," trying to get me, you know, out from under her feet. And so I did, and I really enjoyed it. And all through school, at least when I was in school, we would have creative writing assignments. So we had to write something creative every week, and every week there would be a prompt, and that was probably from second grade through about 10th grade. We were constantly doing creative writing kinds of things, and I really enjoyed them. And when I got to high school, I said, I want to be an author. And I had a few things published, and my parents said, "Oh, that's awesome. Go to law school. You can write on the weekends." And I said, "Oh, but I want to be an author." They said, "I think you should go be a lawyer, write on the weekends." And I think sometimes we tell kids in the arts that because we want that financial security. So I kind of went sideways. I went into instructional design and television directing and producing. So I was still doing a lot of things that were telling story, but it wasn't actually writing books. And so it wasn't until maybe 10 years ago that I decided to go back and started writing books and became, you know, an author. So that was kind of my path.
Okay, thank you. So our next question is from Veronica, and she's asking, are you working on any new projects or stories?
Oh, so many. So in the same world, the Niuhi Shark world, Lauele universe, I'm currently writing on a science fiction story. This one's for adults, and it's kind of talking about the ideas of space colonization and the pressures that we had in, Earth when we had the Western expansion, where we had Europeans coming into India and then also into the Caribbean and into Hawaii. So we had those kinds of colonization pressures. So what might it look like if we had Hawaiians colonizing space, and also people from India colonizing space? So we've got all these space colonies, and the same pressures and questions that the Europeans had, now through a Hawaiian lens. And it's bonkers. It's crazy, but it's kind of fun. And that's tentatively titled Nani's Kiss, but I'm not sure that title is going to stay. I'm about 3/4 of the way through with that novel. So hopefully maybe, around December, maybe spring, we'll have a release date. I'm also working on a series, like a Goosebump series for kids. We're calling it Chicken Skin Stories. And the first one is Under the Bed, and it's about this kid, Kona. And again, it's set in that Lauala universe. So it's Pidgin, Hawaiian, set in an imaginary town called Lauala. He's got a monster under his bed. He doesn't quite know how to deal with it. And so he's trying to protect his family, and this thing likes sweet things. So he keeps stealing, candy and cookies, and he gets blamed for eating the candy and cookies. And he has a really rough relationship with his mom. And so a lot of it is how the monster kind of is a lot of his feelings about his mother. And then I've got some other stories that are not set in Hawaii that are for anthologies that I'm trying to get those out. So those are probably the big projects. And then I've got more coming, but I don't have release dates or publishing dates for those things yet.
Wow, so sounds like you've got a full plate.
I do.
I'm most excited about the chicken skin stories, because strangely, I don't like horror movies, but I like reading horror books. So kind of reminds me of the Obake tales.
Exactly. Yeah, those
definitely
stories. So we'll
looking
have
forward to that one.
Yeah, maybe the Green Lady will show up or something. Some of
Ooh.
those old scary stories. I like you. I like reading scary stories. I hate scary movies.
Yeah.
So it's kind of weird.
Okay, so our next question, can you talk a little bit more about writing in Pidgin? Did you run into roadblocks with editors or others?
Oh my goodness. The hills you die on sometimes. Yeah, that is a hard one. And so not all of my stuff is set in Hawaii. Not all of my stuff has Pidgin and Hawaiian in it, but those stories are the ones I think that are closest to my heart. And the original publisher of One Boy No Water, Jollyfish Press, when I turned in the manuscript, he's like, "There's too much Pidgin, there's too much Hawaiian. You need to change this." And so we fought. What should this look like? What should it be? In retrospect, he was right in terms of global sales. If you're trying to reach as wide an audience as possible, there's probably too much Pidgin and Hawaiian in it. It's particularly for, that upper middle grade young adult reader. For some reason, their mind blows, and I'm not quite sure why. Because they read things like Kwame Alexander, where it's really very urban, or like Faulkner and Dora Wheatley, which is very Southern dialect. So in my head, there was not much difference between those kinds of writings and Pidgin, but there is. So from a marketing standpoint, the publisher was correct. My goal, though, was to write a story that was centered in Hawaii, that kids from Hawaii or whose parents were from Hawaii would recognize it and would resonate with it. And it was not an outsider story. It wasn't somebody coming to Lauala. So there's no dialogue in it that says he looked Mauka. Oh, what does Mauka mean? Oh, that means towards the mountains. There's no dialogue like that. It's just he looked Mauka. So I think I met my goal for writing a story for Islander kids and their families, even in the diaspora. But that market's going to be very, very small. And so you have to be very careful on how you handle that. And then the younger audience that you write for, you have to be aware of how much pigeon you put in there. And so what I try to do is try to keep the pigeon grammar, but it would most of the time it's this THIS instead of DIS, even though that's how we would say it, with the hope that if somebody was a native pigeon speaker, in their mind they would read it as this is the way, but on the page it would say this is the way. So we kind of split that difference. So yeah, I got a lot of pushback and still trying to figure out that balance. But who's my primary audience? I try to make sure that that's the audience that I care most about.
Yeah, hopefully in the future we get, I guess, stories set in Hawaii and the culture gets more representation. Um, so, okay, so next question. What does a typical day for you look like as an author?
So there's the day I set out to do, and then there's the day that actually happens. So, and a lot of it has to do with deadline and whatever craziness is going on in my extended family. I've got parents and in-laws that need care, and you can imagine. So some days my day gets really wrecked. But if I'm on a deadline, so I have something I have to turn into an editor or a publisher by a certain date, and it's getting very close, I think about the story all of the time. I get up early in the morning and I think I know what I'm going to do with the story. And I take a shower, and in the shower, I'm going through all of the things that are going to happen in that story. I grab copious amounts of Diet Coke, and I go up. This is part of my office, and I go and I hide in my office and I just write. I put headphones on. I usually listen to ocean sounds because that blocks everything else out and it kind of fades away in the background. And I write. And if I'm on deadline and I've got a lot of work to do, sometimes I'll write, 18 hours and just stop to go get more Diet Coke and ice and maybe, a couple of snacks. And I'll do that for maybe 3 or 4 days. And then I come up for air, say hello to my family, take care of other things, and then I go back into that pattern. So when I'm really working hard, writing new stuff, that's what it is. When it's not pushing a deadline so much, there's a lot of editing tasks that happen. I edit other books for people. So a lot of time is working on other people's work and finding excuses not to do housework. That's pretty much my typical day.
So I think a lot of us working folks can relate to that. I just, so sort of circling back on what you said earlier about how your parents suggested you become a lawyer and then write as a side job. From what you were telling us right just this moment, it sounds like it's more of a full-time job.
Yes.
Working the, so
Yeah.
that's probably not quite possible.
But there are a lot of authors. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
where writing is their air quotes full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
Most people really can only be creative about 4 hours a day. So they will do some research, they'll think about other things, they'll edit other projects, maybe they'll do some marketing tasks, but the actual like putting words down on the page is about
Mm-hmm.
4 hours a day. And
Oh.
yeah, so I know a lot of authors that have other jobs
Mm-hmm.
and they write, just a couple of hours a day, and they're able to make pretty good progress on their novels. I know other authors who have full-time jobs plus they're a parent. And so what they'll do is they'll go on what they call writing retreats. And sometimes they all get together and they stay at somebody's house and they don't talk to anybody. Somebody brings food in and they just write, for a weekend, and they can put a lot of words down. Or sometimes they'll go away for a weekend to a hotel and they'll just work in a hotel. So there's lots of ways to be an author. And John Grisham, his first book I think was A Time to Kill. He had a train commute, so he would sit on a train from his house to his office where he was a lawyer, and he would write the 45 minutes each way every day. He would just write longhand, and that's why when you read his first book, the chapters are so short, because it's about what he could work on a train ride. So yeah, it's possible to write. I know other people that write on their phone. So while they're at their kid's soccer game, they're working on a novel, or standing in line at the bank, they're working on a novel. So
Sort of like multitasking.
yeah, and a lot of people do dictation. So while they're on a treadmill exercising, they're dictating their novel, or doing the dishes, they're dictating their novel. So there's lots of different ways. The right way is the way that works best for you.
Oh, we have another question from Richard. He asks, with the chicken skin tales, have you given any thought to incorporate the Obake files into them for a literary crossover universe of sorts?
So if we're talking about the same thing, it's a collection of stories by Grant something or something Grant. Is that what they're talking about, the Obake files, or is it something else? Because what I'm thinking of, it's a thick paperback book. That's what I have in my head, and it's stories that he collected, true life stories that he collected, and then he just kind of recounts them as case files. So I'm aware, if that's what you're talking about, I'm aware of that book, but I'm not looking to that as a source. These stories are all going to be set in Lauele, which is an imaginary part somewhere on Oahu. And it's the town where these stories and other stories take place. And it's a place where all supernatural things are real. They're just under the radar of most humans. And so it's stories. So a lot of the characters from my other stories will cross into these chicken skin stories, I'm thinking, but they're going to be kind of standalone stories. So you don't have to read them in order. At least I don't think so. It's in the early stage. We're still writing them.
Okay. So we have another question. What are the most challenging and most rewarding things about being an author?
One of the most rewarding is when I get a chance to talk to kids for this series, for kids who've read the books and they're excited because they see themselves, and they have all kinds of questions like, did you really mean this? Did you really mean this when you wrote this? And I get to say, yes, I did. And you understood that because you're a little local kid from Hawaii, and I wrote that just for you. And when kids say things like that, they get excited that they want to write their own stories. And so those are some of the most rewarding things. The hard things is, one of the hardest things is that I live in Utah. And it's hard to find people locally. I know lots of writers, but who can get what I'm writing and why I'm writing it. And so a lot of times I sit in this room and kind of talk to myself and make stories up. And that can be hard. It would be fun to have somebody that I could go grab lunch and brainstorm with. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges.
Okay. Okay, so another question is, oh, sorry, that was traffic out there. How or why did you get involved in editing other people's works? Okay.
How and why? It's hard to say. Money is one answer. I make money at it. Another is I have a background in literary criticism and critique and story structure. And so I help people doctor their books, where the story's not working quite right or how to make it more marketable. And then those great English skills, most of them I learned at Kamehameha. So that's kind of how it started. And then I was a technical writer and an instructional designer for a lot of years. And so, of course, that's tons of writing, and QA QCs with style guides. And so it was a natural outgrowth of all of those other things that I've done. And then again, where I am, I know lots of authors, but not authors that write Hawaiian fiction. So story is story. So I'm able to help other people with their books, even though they can't help me with mine quite so much.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Okay, so that's all the questions from our audience. And sorry, Daniel, how are we doing on time?
I think it might be a good time to wrap up. If you have
Okay.
any last comments you want to make, I think this would be a great time. So many wonderful questions. You can tell people
Mhm.
had a lot of thought that went into this, and I've loved listening to all of it. So, yeah.
Okay. Oh, all right. So, yeah, that was definitely interesting, and very informative. So thank you to our audience members who asked those questions and who also attended. Um, so I had a great time. I hope you guys did too. And thank you, Miss Lehua, um, for joining us today and answering all the questions.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. Um, I do this for schools. So if you're a school teacher and would like me to come talk story with you guys, I'm happy to do that. I'm very easy to find. Lehua at lehuaparker.com is my email. And thanks again. It's been a lot of fun.